Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NASE Preferred Supplier webinar, 7 things you don't know about recalls, but definitely should. I'm Bill Parker with NASE, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I am happy to introduce Roger Hancock. Roger is the CEO of Recall InfoLink. Recall InfoLink is one of the foremost experts on recalls with experience that spans retail, tech, data, regulatory, and the entire supply chain. Before founding Recall InfoLink in 2007, Roger spent over 16 years at Albertson as Director of Food Safety and Q&A. He directed 250 recalls a year and helped the company adopt new technologies to improve the recall process. Now he's committed to making recalls faster, easier, and more accurate across the supply chain by creating recall-ready communities that protect consumers and brands. And with that, I will turn things over to Roger.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you to NASC for this opportunity to speak to you all. And thank you all for logging in to follow this discussion about recalls. Now, I've got a little spoiler alert. The advertisement is 7 things you don't know. You might know 1 or 2 of the things because you're in the food business, you're in the animal supplement business, you do things that may end up in recalls. And so they might not all be completely new, but I think there may be some new twists to the different things that we talk about today. So it's worth paying attention. And I know that recalls aren't the favorite thing to talk about, and so sometimes it's easy to kind of glaze over. So to keep your attention, we've got a poll at the beginning and we've got a poll at the end just to let you give some feedback. So I'm going to ask Jenny now to put up a poll. You can select which of the following is something that you really think is true for you. So true for your business, true for you personally. What's the most true of the statements that are up on the screen? And we'll give you just a few minutes to submit your responses. Okay, so it looks like mock recalls and compliance are the 2 most true statements, although not for everybody, but for the most common responses. Those 2 are in there. So we'll be talking about those. And actually being prepared for a recall is just the right thing to do, got the highest response. And so I'm happy to see that that got the highest response, because I think that while these all can be true, that one for me is the most true. Okay, so let's get started. Some of you said the most true thing for you is retailers say you're the hardest part of a recall. What exactly does that mean? Retailers and wholesalers may have 100 or 1,000 or thousands of points of sale to communicate with to get a recall processed across their distribution channels. And yet still they say the hardest part is the supplier piece. And why do they say that? They say that because there's no standard that exists for how to communicate recalls. And so if a wholesaler resells product from, say, 5 or 10,000 suppliers, those 5 or 10,000 suppliers all communicate a recall to them differently. And so the retailers and wholesalers say the hardest part about doing a recall is getting the accurate information that pertains to me directly as a client of the supplier, instead of some general instructions that I can't translate into what I need to tell my points of sale, my retail stores, my restaurants, my kiosks. And so it's common for retailers and wholesalers to say, if we could get standardized information from the supplier, that would make our jobs 80% easier, because 80% of the time, 80% of the pain of recalls is getting the right information from suppliers. 20% of the pain is passing it on to their customers or their points of sale. So really, it's about getting the right information at the right time so that the retail wholesale segment of the supply chain, your customers, can do the right thing. Let me see if I can advance this slide. Number 2. Experts agree. And we just published an expert panel paper where we had a variety of experts. And they all said the most important thing that can be done to make recalls better and to protect brand is to practice a recall event. And the first thing about practice is you make practice as close to real as you can. So in this picture, you can't see it, but this batting practice, the batter is equipped with what he normally would be equipped with when he gets up to bat. And there's a pitcher pitching to him, not just a pitching machine. And so he's simulating the real live batting event that he's trying to practice, not just imagining in his head or taking practice swings like you do in the batting circle. But first, making practice as close to real as possible. And then second, the practice isn't done in isolation. So a batting coach is watching practice. Why does a batting coach watch practice? Because outside input helps you understand what you can do to get better. You can make an adjustment to your stance, you can make an adjustment to your swing, or you can make an adjustment to the size bat that you use or the kind of helmet that you wear. And so getting some outside input on how you're performing helps you identify gaps, helps you improve or close the gaps, improve your process. And so those two things about practice, making it as close to real as possible and having some external way of evaluating gaps and areas of improvement, are very important. So it's not just the practice, but it's how you practice that's important. Moving on to number 3. Most mock recalls, which got a lot of responses in what was most true in the poll that Jenny put up a few slides ago. Most mock recalls actually today, and this is speaking generally, not specifically to any of you in particular, but generally most recalls are more like traceability exercises than they are like recalls. Why do I say this? Most mock recalls today define a scenario that say these products were affected, and then they determine, okay, of those products that are affected, where are they in the supply chain? Are they in offsite distribution? Are they still in our manufacturing facility? Are they at our wholesaler, retailer, supply chain partners? Where are the products that we need to recall? And once 98% or more of the products that are included in the recall and the practice recall are identified, their locations are identified, then the reporting begins. Okay, we identified these products are in these locations. We can recover them by taking certain actions, and the mock recall itself is over. So the actual process of recalling products never gets practiced in most mock recalls today. And so that's why most mock recalls trace the product. They identify the product and trace it where it is, but they don't actually go through the steps of recalling the product. And that's where we see gaps existing. It's not necessarily in identifying the product and knowing where the product is, but it's in communicating to people who need to take action to remove the product. That's not part of the mock recall process in general today. Number 4. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to transition from the build, which is practicing, identifying the products, identifying the locations of the products, we're going to shift towards taking action. So we're going to shift from a build to how you respond. First, recalls require communication. Without good communication, a recall will never happen. And communication, good communication, actually can be prepared ahead of time so that you aren't in crisis mode trying to figure out how do we communicate to people in a way that retains their trust, builds their confidence that we're doing the right thing, even though a problem has happened, and gets the right information to the right people. So doing that ahead of time, creating some templates or some guidelines for how you're going to communicate is really, really important. Consistent messaging across your supply chain is probably the most important thing you can do to retain brand trust through a recall event. Everybody is saying the same thing. Everybody understands the reason why the recall is happening. Everybody understands what needs to happen because a recall is happening, and everybody's equipped to play their role. It's a complicated piece of the puzzle. And like the graphic shows there, there's lots of moving parts, and distilling the right parts down so that you're communicating clearly and consistently is challenging. And so getting some templates and some processes prepared ahead of time makes it a lot easier and faster to include these communications in a recall process. An example, I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, know that right now there's a boar's head recall that started about 2 weeks ago now, because boar's head products were identified as potentially being contaminated with listeria. Lots of people were getting sick, and some people, unfortunately, even have passed away because of this contamination. And there was a magazine that wrote a story that said the longer that this recall has persisted in the news so long, they announced the recall, then they expanded the items in the recall, and then they closed a plant, and then they said, here are some things we're going to do to fix this. Because the news was drawn out and communication wasn't clear initially, the brand reputation and the cost of the recall are continuing to increase. So I encourage you, take time to think, okay, who do we need to talk to? What kinds of communication do we need to give them? And how can we coordinate them so they all are giving the same information to the people that need to take action, so that we're eliminating confusion instead of promoting or fostering confusion. So we've covered 4 of the 7 things that you may not know, or you may not know completely. So far, I don't know if any questions have come in or not. I'm going to take just a break to take a sip of something for my voice. Number 5. Number 5 of the 7 things you may not know is that you actually can reduce the labor that's required to process a recall by up to 90% if you put the right technology pieces together. If you use a coordinated platform instead of trying to do things kind of ad hoc in a way that works for the sales process, but may not work so well for the recall process. The reason I say sales process is because a lot of sales happen where different salespeople have different customers that they're communicating to. And when a recall occurs, a lot of times the recall messaging is given to the salespeople to communicate to their customers. And so what ends up happening is, because of a lack of coordinated communication, different salespeople give different messaging to different customers, who then talk to other customers, and it creates a lot of confusion. So one of the ways that you can reduce labor is by using a coordinated technology system to make sure that you're communicating consistently, effectively, timely to all of your customers. And let me tell you a story that kind of illustrates this point. There was a retailer that I talked to probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago now, maybe. They said, "Oh yeah, we have a process, and when a recall comes in, a light goes off in the office, and we figure out who needs to be involved in this recall because of whatever this recall includes. And then we divide up the stores, and we divide up the stores a little bit unevenly depending on who has the right amount of time. And then we start calling the stores to give them notification about the products that they need to recall. And there's always some confusion. And usually we spend about five management people spend about 2 days collecting the recall information, communicating the recall information, following up with the recall communication. And this was to a chain at the time that had, maybe 200 stores. And so 5 management people spent 2 days or 10 management days or 2 weeks of management labor to get a recall done completely, they thought. Then they said, okay, well, let's take a look at using a platform that can do a lot of this work for us. Today, one staff person collects the information, packages it up, communicates both internally and externally. All of the stores, now more than 500, respond, and the whole thing is done with 2 hours of staff time instead of 2 weeks of management time. And so just creating the efficiency of centralizing the recall process and assisting the recall process with tools that can help the centralization standardize, provide consistent messaging, and manage the messaging, do the documentation. They tell us now the result is better than it used to be when they had 5 management people doing it on their own. And so that's only one example. There are other examples too. But it's an example of taking a look at what you're currently doing and asking the question, is what we're currently doing today efficient enough for a recall that might happen next week or next month or next year? And if you practice in a realistic way, in a way that simulates the process, you'll identify ways that you can apply technology, either existing technology or new technology. You can consolidate messaging, you can practice ahead of time, you can prepare ahead of time, and that can reduce your labor by up to 90%. You don't have to sacrifice quality. You can get the same or better results at a much lower cost to the organization and to the brand to get a recall processed and implemented effectively. What's number 6? Okay, again, I said we transition from the build to taking action. The reason this is an action slide is because regulatory compliance usually begins either somewhere in the middle of a recall or after a recall has been completed, or at the end of a recall process instead of at the beginning. So the regulators typically don't come in and say, okay, I hear you're going to do a recall, let me help you. Typically they'll come in and say, either I hear you're working on a recall, how's it going, let me observe, or you just did a recall and I want to understand what you did, who you communicated to, etc. So regulatory compliance doesn't have to be painful. And the way to reduce the pain of the regulatory compliance is to manage the data of a recall. Well, what's the data of the recall? First part of the data of a recall is the product description. If you accurately identify the products that are being recalled and you provide accurate attribute information, lot code, sell by date, manufacturing plant, et cetera, that simplifies a lot of the regulatory compliance conversations. Second, if you can quickly produce the messaging that was provided, say, here's what we said went wrong, here's what we told our customers to do with it, here's the response that we're getting that demonstrates that our customers are taking action. That also goes a long, long ways to making the regulatory conversation easy. Finally, have a good list, a solid list of both the geography and the specific businesses that you distributed the affected product to. Because what the regulators are tasked with is making sure that people and pets and animals aren't subjected to something that's going to harm them. So how do they do that? Well, they have to understand what the products are that may harm them, what people are being told to do with those products that may harm somebody or an animal. And third, who's being told to take what action. And if you have that data together, when the regulator shows up at your door, the conversation is going to be really simple. And instead of being a tense adversarial conversation that doesn't end well, it'll be we're in this together, we have similar goals, here's the data that demonstrates what we've done. Do you see any place for us to adjust or modify to address questions that you see that we haven't addressed yet? Makes it all way easier. Again, another story, a client of ours said that when the regulator came in, they went to a conference room, they pulled out all kinds of files out of file cabinets, and they tried to, with their files, answer the questions from the regulator about these three things. What are the products? What were the instructions? Who got the instructions delivered? How's it being done? How's it progressing? And what they told us was, an hour or two, or sometimes 3 hours later, the meeting would end. Nobody was happy, but there was no point in going further because the regulator got minimal answers to his questions. We were exhausted. Now, they said the regulator comes in, pour him a cup of coffee, open an account open a platform that shows a window of what the products are, what the instructions are, who's been notified, how it's going, and it solves all of the regulatory tension that existed when we didn't have that data collected in the right place. So the biggest thing you can do to simplify regulatory compliance is manage your recall data well. Manage your product data well, manage your instructional information well, and manage your customer data well. And if you have those three things managed well, regulatory compliance will be easier. Now, of course, there's forms that need to get filled out to satisfy the regulators as well. But the data in those forms comes from the products, the instructions, and the customer list. And so you'll have the data available to complete the forms that the regulators are looking for. So a little bit of extra discussion about regulatory compliance, because as the poll indicated, that sometimes can be a pretty big pain point. And it doesn't have to be, because you can start the meeting with, we have the same objective. Our objective is to keep animals safe. And let us show you the steps we're taking to keep animals safe. And then let's discuss if there's anything further that we need to do to help us both accomplish our objectives. So number 7, this is the last in the list of 7, although there may be a bonus coming. Being prepared for a recall is prevention. people don't think this way. People think that prevention is doing things so that a recall doesn't happen. And we all drive cars, and we all know that nobody plans when they get in their car in the morning to drive to work, or when they're headed out for a vacation, or they're headed to the store. Nobody plans to get into an accident. However, the best preventive step that your car is equipped with is an airbag. What does it prevent? It prevents more harm from happening when an accident does occur. Lots of work has gone in to build that structure so that an airbag will deploy if an accident happens. The purpose of the airbag is preventing more harm happening as a result of the accident than necessary. A recall preparation can be thought of in exactly the same light. We're not counting on an accident happening when we get up and go to work in the morning. We're not counting on a recall happening. We're not counting on a contamination event or foreign material or mislabeling. We're not counting on any of those things. As a matter of fact, we put systems in place to prevent those things. But maybe a recall is going to happen. Maybe something is going to go wrong. And so building a system that can support the business if something does go wrong is actually a preventive step, not a reactive step. And so I'd encourage you all to have kind of the airbag mindset. What's the airbag mindset? Well, effort is put into a system that will deploy if an accident happens. And the deployment of that system has parts, it has pieces. In the case of a recall, has lots of people engaged, but we can also automate some things. We can automate notification, we can automate documentation, we can automate response management. So there are things that we can automate, but we also have to include lots of people in the recall process. And so practicing in a simulated way will let us test the strength of this system that we build so that we can move a recall from crisis management to a normal business activity. And to circle all the way back to the beginning, or I think it was number 2, reducing the labor required. You spend a lot less labor operating a normal business process, one that's practiced and tried and refined, than you do running a crisis management where there's lots of ad hoc pieces. There's lots of people who don't know exactly what to do, and so they're doing their best. So transitioning from crisis management to a normal business process as a preventive step will help you achieve all of the things that we've talked about so far, reducing labor, getting a better outcome, et cetera, et cetera. So that brings us to the end of the 7 things that you may not know. Like I said at the beginning, you may know some of these, maybe not in the detail that we talked about them today. But hopefully this has been informative. And there is a bonus that I'm pretty sure not many people know about, although I wouldn't be surprised if there's somebody on the call who knows about this. For those of you who have recall insurance, which is an important part of business protection when you're in a consumable business manufacturing industry, recall insurance can actually save a company. It can mitigate a risk, can help cover the economic loss that saves a company. And what you may not know is that part of the premium that's paid in a lot of product recall insurance policies, I can't guarantee that it's universal, but the majority of well-established recall insurance policies have what they call is pre-event consulting, a pre-event consulting allowance. A portion of the premium that you're paying can be used to cover preparation steps. So it can be used to cover bringing a consultant in, like I mentioned, the batting coach, to look at the way you do recalls and give you feedback on gaps or best practices that can help you do it better. Also, pre-event consulting can cover practice with technology solutions that have a cost associated with the use of them as part of good preparation for reducing the claim potential of a recall. So if you are practicing with a consultant, or you're practicing with a technology, or you're practicing in a simulated way, that practice can prepare, and what I just said, transition from crisis management to kind of more normal business process management. And what does that result in? It results in cost savings. It results in better action that recovers more cost, which results in lower liability, which results in less damage to the brand. All of those things translate to an insurance company into lower claims, which is good for them. So they've added this pre-event consulting allowance, part of the premium that is paid for recall insurance, to help offset the cost of getting ready. With that, let's transition. If there's any questions that have come in to Bill during the conversation, or if there's any questions now that people are interested in getting answered, let's turn to a Q&A session. It's been a lot of information. I've enjoyed sharing it with you. I hope that you've been able to benefit from it and at least resonate with a couple of things that, hey, I thought I knew about this, but maybe I know a little bit more now. Any questions, Bill?
Okay, I have a few here. First one is, what's the difference between a mock recall and a traceability exercise?
Good question. So think of either replacing the word mock or adding to the word mock simulation. Because as we discussed earlier, mock recalls you can think of normally are internal company operations. We develop a scenario that says, okay, something went wrong with these products. And then you follow those products to see where they went. Can we define them all? Can we capture them all? Can we describe what needs to be done with them? And once that internal operation is concluded, then the thinking is the mock recall is finished. And in fact, if you get a third-party food safety audit on an annual basis as part of your ISO certification, or as part of your even insurance policy management, if you have a third-party audit done, a lot of times they'll look at your mock recall, the last mock recall you've done, and they'll check the box for that internal exercise. And so they'll give you the impression that that mock recall is really a recall preparation step. But what we see is that when things really start to fall apart is when a recall exercise transitions from an internal exercise to an external exercise. And I can tell you from thousands of recall experience, there is no recall that doesn't have an external part to it. If there's no external part to it, there's no recall, right? If you capture all of the defective product before it's sold into distribution, you don't have to recall it, you just have to dispose of it or recondition it or whatever you have to do. It's the external part that makes the mock recall really a mock recall. Traceability, on the other hand, is strictly an internal exercise. Traceability is strictly identifying product that needs to be located and locating it. It doesn't involve any external portion. So the difference between a mock recall correctly conducted and a traceability exercise is that external component. Good question.
And here's a follow-up to the one you just answered. how often should a mock recall be done?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna give here a range. Of course, minimum is on an annual basis. And I would say, depending on the nature of your business and the nature of your supply chain, maybe twice a year. And let me give just a little bit of color to those. The reason I say annually is because the hardest part about a recall, by far, is having accurate contact information for your customers. What we see is that recalls can happen, and they can happen quickly and efficiently if the customer list is easy to access and accurate. But a lot of times, as I mentioned, there might be 3 different customer lists. Salesman A and saleswoman B and salesperson C all have their own customer lists, and merging them isn't always easy. So on an annual basis, running through a simulated recall or recall simulation that includes an external component will help you stay current with your accurate contact information for your customers. Okay, and the reason I say 2 might be appropriate is because I'm sure that we have some manufacturers on the line that actually have different product lines that go to different customer bases. And so it's not uncommon to have one recall that may affect one portion of the business, one set of distribution points, one type of products. And then because you have a different part of the business, a different division, a different manufacturing line, a different manufacturing location that produces different stuff, it just might make sense to go through this simulation 2 times a year instead of just once. Back to you, Bill. Good
All right.
questions, by the way.
You mentioned up to a 90% labor reduction in more efficient processes. Can you break that down a little?
Sure. Okay, there are different buckets of costs that go into recall expense. There's an administrative bucket, deciding to do a recall, deciding which products need to be recalled, and deciding and putting into action the recall process. There's an administrative part. There's a product part, which includes both credit to your customers for products that are being returned or sent to the landfill or reconditioned. There's also disposition costs for those products, whether it's landfill or labor to recondition or labels to print to be put on product packaging, etc. So there's an administrative cost, there's a product cost, and there's a significant labor cost. So you can imagine that if your product is being sold in 1,000 retail locations or being sold at 20 distributors, that they have to go through labor to remove the product from their supply chain and dispose of it correctly, whatever your instructions are. It is more and more common, not universal, but more and more common for that labor to be passed back to the supplier or the manufacturer as part of the recall cost. And so doing a simulation helps you identify where are things inefficient, where is time being extended. Time and dollars have, as everybody knows, a direct correlation. And where can we create efficiencies? And so by doing a simulation, you can identify gaps that can close, that can reduce the amount of time that makes your recall process more efficient. You can also identify steps that are prolonging, and then you can apply technology to again reduce the time that's required to get recalls effectively processed. And you can also use technology on the back end. So to file a good insurance claim, or to maintain good relations with your trading partners, processing recalls, charges in a documented way makes everybody happier. There's no guesswork. There's no feeling like recall costs are being inflated for one reason or another. And so by kind of deconstructing where you're spending money in your recall simulation, and then looking at how you can build efficiencies into that recall process, either by consolidating around people who are involved or applying technology to make things faster, there's real savings that can be achieved there. And I'd be happy to answer questions in a more one-on-one fashion, Bill, if any of your members want to follow up and have a conversation about their particular practice and where they might be able to save money. I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. Another question. Do you recommend programs to help with product recall setup and execution when it's needed?
By programs, I'm understanding you to mean software, some sort of technology. And there are software products on the market that can help with recall process management. And I think taking a look at the options that are available and how they connect the supply chain to support your recall efforts makes a lot of sense. I think that in today's technological environment, there are tools that can create great efficiencies. Number one, reduce errors. So as I mentioned, if you have different people communicating the same message, after a while, just like if you play telephone tag, the message morphs and you lose continuity of the message. So technology will make sure that errors are reduced, messaging is consistent, delivery is documented. You know, it's like sending a registered letter in the mail. Well, you have a timestamp that says this email or this SMS or this phone call was delivered at this time and received at this time. So documentation. And then on the back end, being able to tabulate responses in an automated way instead of in a single email response way or a single mailed back response way can bring a lot of efficiencies. And so I would recommend evaluating the programs or the software that's available and making an assessment of which one fits your needs the best.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to talk to your members offline about services that we provide if they have interest in that as well.
Another question we have, what is the biggest problem you see with recall management?
Well, I kind of gave that away with my answer to the last question.
Yeah.
The use of technology. By far, the biggest hurdle that we see, and it slows everything down, is accurate lists, accurate contact information for a manufacturer's customers. And that by far is the biggest challenge that we see. Second to that, the biggest challenge that we see is consistent communication. Because right now, there isn't a standard way to communicate recalls across the supply chain. And so if we have 150 NASC suppliers on this call, I guarantee you there's 140, if not 150 different ways that you all process a recall to your supply chain. And what that means for your customers is when they receive recalls, they're getting them with different bits of information, different formats, different emphases from everyone that it comes in. And so consistent information is, I think, the second biggest problem. the lack of a standard way to process recalls. You know, when you get down to it, recalls have three important things. First, what product or products are affected? What went wrong? Tell me about the product. Second, instructions. Tell me what to do. Third, customers. Combine the products and the instructions to the right people so that they can do the right thing. Nobody's brand is protected if product doesn't come out of supply. And so protecting your brand means getting those three things right. Accurate product descriptions, accurate information about what happened and what to do, and accurate customer contact information, and things will go well. And just to reemphasize the last answer, there is technology available to package these things up across your supply chain to make management an easier practice to perform than it has been in the past. So those are 1 and 2, Bill.
So you've mentioned inefficiencies. Do you find that the contributors to those inefficiencies within a company, are they generated internally, or are they generated externally with the lack of standard for communications as one of those factors?
Yeah, I think my answer ties the two together. If the communication is consistent from the supplier, then 100% of the inefficiency is generated downstream in the customer supply chain. And that happens. I mean, when you're communicating a recall to 1,000 stores or 10,000 or 200,000, there's going to be some inefficiencies just built in. If the communication coming out of the supplier is inconsistent or confusing, then the inefficiencies that occur in the supply chain are owned by the supplier. And I'll give you an example. When I was at Albertsons, one of the last recalls I did was from one of the largest CPG suppliers in the world who manufactured pet food. I'm sure it was not a company represented on the call today, 100% sure of that. And this company was doing a product recall of their pet food, and they gave us one product list on the West Coast. They gave us a different product list for stores on the East Coast, and they gave us a third product list for stores in the Midwest. We were a nationwide retailer, and we had 3 different product lists for 3 different geographic distributions, and none of them were correct. So we had 3 different lists, and none of them were accurate. So there, this confusion initiated at the supplier and created all kinds of confusion. Now, it could be that if the supplier had given us accurate information, but we had, bad printers in the store, and so when we printed off, this was back in the dot matrix days, when we printed off a list of products that needed to be pulled and gave it to the clerk to go pull them, if it was hard to read an item number or something like that, then the confusion is downstream in the supply chain. So it depends on the accuracy of the communication that's offered. Confusion and inefficiencies can happen anywhere, but putting together a good recall communication package and delivering it in a timely, consistent way puts suppliers in a strong place as far as inefficiency goes. Yeah, we have one more poll. It's kind of a reiteration, but it's now that we've talked about these things, which one surprises you the most, or which one was the most informative from where you began? So this is encouraging for me. because it shows a lot of engagement. This isn't catching you off guard. And there's a variety of answers, which I would have anticipated because everybody came into this conversation from their own perspective. You know, one of the things that we've learned over the more than 15 years we've been doing this, everyone has a unique perspective when it comes to recalls. Very few are the people who only do recalls as their professional function. We have some clients that have recall managers because they do so many recalls, but that's very few. Most people have recalls as an add-on to their normal day job. And so they all have their own perspective about how to approach a recall, how to make it happen efficiently and effectively. And what these poll results indicate is exactly that. Everybody was coming from a little bit different perspective. And so the information that was most informative or most surprising to them was a little bit different from others. So thank you all for being engaged. Thank you all for this response and your response at the beginning. I hope that that you found this to be informative, educational, and equipping so that you can move recall preparation from a crisis management to a normal business process that you practice regularly, if not frequently. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to NASC, and thank you to Bill and Jenny for facilitating this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you very much, Roger.
My pleasure.